Tonight, in the bridges of Madison County, Clint Eastwood falls in love with Meryl Streep.
Men still do that, don't they? I'm not out of date, am I? I've been picking flowers for a woman, a sign of appreciation.
No, not at all. Except those are poisonous.
In Forget Paris, Billy Crystal falls in love with Deborah Winger.
You want to talk about religion, politics, whether you want to have kids or not?
Nah, that crap will all work itself out. We've handled the big issues.
Fine. I'll marry you.
And to continue this romantic note, there's young love of a sort in Blue Juice.
I hope that's the 12-inch, because this recipe takes forever. And I want to hear you beg.
Good evening. The Bridges of Madison County is a very short book which has been turned into rather a long film. Being among the minority who have not read Robert James Waller's amazingly successful novel, I can't say whether this is a good thing from the book lover's point of view, but I don't think cinema goers will find much to complain about. The story is simplicity itself, a romantic concoction for the middle-aged, which seeks to prove that if sex doesn't exactly begin at 40 plus, it doesn't have to end there either. Clint Eastwood plays a photographer for the National Geographic magazine who, seeking some unusual bridges to snap in Iowa in 1965, gets lost and seeks help from a farmer's wife, Meryl Streep. She's an Italian, married for 15 years to a dull but decent man who's just taken their 2 children to the state fair. So, not having much to do except, as she puts it, make herself a cup of tea and maybe split the atom, she shows Clint the bridges and then invites him to dinner. So, slowly and gently begins a 4-day love affair that will become the most important event in both their lives. Always happens, doesn't it? Always happens. Anyway, knowledge of the affair only comes to light after Streep's death, when her now grown-up and married children, Annie Corley and Victor Slezak, read her diaries. They, and in particular Slezak, are horrified by their mother's abandoned behaviour. But as they read on, they begin to re-evaluate both her and their own lives. And that's about it, really. On the face of it, this is not a yarn that should occupy us for 2¼ hours, and yet it does so quite grippingly for all manner of reasons. First, there's an intelligent, adult, and not overly sentimental script by Richard LaGravenese. Secondly, Clint Eastwood's direction is perfectly measured, letting the story find and maintain its own natural pace. And thirdly, there are 2 very fine performances by himself and Streep. Early on, there are 1 or 2 things about Streep that irritate: the slight, initially uncertain Italian accent, and a sequence in which, listening to the photographer's tales, she giggles and kicks her legs in the air like a schoolgirl. Gradually, though, she emerges as an intelligent woman, much brighter than her husband, who's accepted her lot uncomplainingly, but still yearns for something better. Eastwood, too, giving a much warmer, more tender performance than one expects from him, is most convincing as the craggy, middle-aged recipient of all her repressed desire, though I suspect his taste in open-toed sandals will offend the romantic purist. Several directors, including Spielberg and Sidney Pollack, had a go at bringing the Bridges of Madison County to the screen, but I doubt if any of them could have done better than Eastwood. Oscar nominations next year? I shouldn't be at all surprised. Now, though, for the list of the 10 most popular films in America. At 10, Apollo 13, Tom Hanks as the captain of the failed lunar mission. 9, Waterworld, Kevin Costner's mega-budget movie set in a world where land no longer exists. At 8, The Usual Suspects, a cracking suspense thriller with a good, strong twist at the end. 7, Something to Talk About. Julia Roberts stars in a modern tale of love and other natural disasters. At 6, Babe the Gallant Pig, an Australian story of a piglet which becomes a champion sheepdog. 5, A Walk in the Clouds, a remake of the Mexican picture Like Water for Chocolate, starring Keanu Reeves. 4 is Desperado, Antonio Banderas in a violent follow-up to the low-budget El Mariachi. 3, The Prophecy, with Christopher Walken as a renegade angel in a darkly gothic thriller. 2, Dangerous Minds, in which high school teacher Michelle Pfeiffer seeks to inspire her inner-city students. And at number 1, Mortal Kombat, a martial arts action-adventure topping the chart for the 2nd week. The Bridges of Madison County is about late love, last love, and the offbeat British comedy Blue Juice is also about love in a way. Much more, though, it's about the agony of turning 30 if you're a macho, blokish male. Sean Pertwee is a dedicated surfer who lives in a Cornish village, which must be rather like plying your trade as a professional cricketer in downtown Detroit. However, as the story opens, he's not doing any surfing. In the first place, there aren't any waves, and in the second place, he's got a dodgy back and has to wear a girdle. Besides, his girlfriend, Catherine Zeta-Jones, wants him to give it up and settle down, if only because the bad back has absolutely ruined their sex life and caused her to find other ways to divert herself in bed. Well, whatever turns you on, I suppose. Everything comes to a head when a bunch of Pertwee's friends, all of them hitting the dreaded 30, turn up unexpectedly. Stephen McIntosh is an unscrupulous record producer. Ewan McGregor a junkie, and Peter Gunn a bit of a nerd who's about to get married, the final fatal step into adulthood. The other two have kidnapped Gunn to make him think again about the nuptials. At this point, the film becomes pretty messy with too much going on. Gunn is given mind-altering drugs that make him do bizarre things. McIntosh has a run-in with a vengeful female disc jockey, and McGregor cons Pertwee into having one last shot at surfing the dreaded boneyard. Indeed, what with a cameo appearance by Jenny Agutter and so many subplots going on, a somewhat frenetic note enters the proceedings. Even so, this first feature by Carl Preketzer and his co-writer Peter Salmi has a lot of zest, energy and good humour, and the cast, especially Pertwee, who is normally seen in unsympathetic roles, does a fine job. But now for our weekly report. Forget Paris is a romantic comedy written and directed by Billy Crystal, who also co-stars with Deborah Winger. Briefly, Crystal is in France to bury his father. His late father, you understand. This is not a black comedy, alongside his wartime comrades. But the coffin goes missing, and an airline executive, Winger, steps in to help. Tom Brook talked to Crystal and Winger, not in Paris, but in New York.
The world of American basketball provides one of the backdrops in Forget Paris. So on location, Billy Crystal could be found hard at work directing real-life basketball players and other members of the cast and crew, as well as concentrating on his own performance. He portrays a professional basketball referee called Mickey Gordon, a hyperkinetic and at times rather obnoxious character who underneath is quite endearing.
Technical foul! Who's shooting? Let's go! For what? Do you want another one? Do you want another one? What did I say? Just because you're having a bad game, don't take it out on me. You're out of here, Kareem!
Mickey Gordon is a really funny, set in his ways, bachelor, and I think he's a very romantic, very sentimental guy who is a little selfish at times, but is willing to try and change.
When the death of Mickey's father takes him unexpectedly to Paris, he obeys Hollywood tradition for newcomers to that city and promptly falls in love. The object of Mickey's affections is Ellen Andrews, a sophisticated American living in Paris, played by Deborah Winger. On the surface, the two leading characters couldn't seem more ill-suited.
Although their interests were really different, they sort of complement each other rather than match. You know, they always used to say a perfect match, but I'm not sure that in a long-term way that it isn't more of a complement, like complementary colors are usually opposite colors.
Paris forms the backdrop for the early, heady days of the relationship, but the real focus of the film is what happens to the couple once they're back in America and married. Although a romantic comedy, Forget Paris is also a film which attempts to explore the struggles common to many marriages.
I think it deals with compromise. I think it deals with getting used to each other, and it deals with how much of yourself do you give up for the sake of a new partner. How much of your individuality do you, how much can you change for the sake of the marriage or the relationship before you go nuts?
Are these issues that you can identify with, you know, in your own life, in your own marriage?
Oh, sure. I'm a veteran. I'm married almost 25, well, I am married 25 years now. It's always something that you always have to work on. It's always something that if you really want it badly enough, you listen and talk and do, and laugh and cry and do all the things that a marriage is about.
But Forget Paris isn't just a sober discourse on marriage. There are plenty of funny moments too. At one point, Deborah Winger charges into a vet surgery with what appears to be a bird stuck to her face.
Give me Dr. Filter, I'll kill you!
People don't automatically associate you with comedy. Did you relish the idea of doing a comedy role?
Well, I try not to approach it that way. I mean, I think that I'm not attracted to as many comedic scripts because they aren't as good as a rule. It's harder to find a good comedy than it is to find a good drama. life is more dramatic than it is funny.
You're a very widely respected actress, but you haven't had what people call a mega hit for a long time.
For a long time, yeah.
Does that bother you? Is that important
No,
to you?
it's such a relief. I mean, what was kind of great, and I see as a blessing, is that I came out of the pen, so to speak, with these humongous mainstream successes, so I got to feel what that feels like, and it's nothing that I seek. So I just think it's fine. You know, you can really have a mildly successful film that's quite wonderful, and that's, in a way, better than having to have it be a flop or a hit.
Mickey and Ellen's relationship in Forget Paris is recounted through a series of flashbacks chronicled by a group of friends in a restaurant who are awaiting their arrival. This narrative gimmick proved a little tiresome to some American critics, as did the awkward chemistry between the co-stars. But what saves Forget Paris are its moments of comic relief, like Mickey's frustrations with his senile father-in-law, who endlessly mumbles the words of a car commercial.
You ask for it, you got it, Toyota.
Forget Paris opens here on September the 29th. And so to the second British film of the evening, The Young Poisoner's Handbook, which is a very black comedy inspired by the true story of Graham Young, whose ambition, amply fulfilled, was to pursue a career as a poisoner. We first meet Young, very well played by Hugh O'Connor, aged 14 and a chemistry swot, being knocked about and otherwise abused by a somewhat dysfunctional family. He gets his revenge, though. He poisons his stepmother and is getting close to bumping off his father and uncle as well when he's arrested, found guilty of murder and sent to a hospital for the criminally insane. There he attracts the attention of the resident shrink, Anthony Sher, and after several years cunningly persuades him that he is now cured and repentant. So Young is released into the unsuspecting community, gets a menial job in a factory and starts his work all over again. This is not a lad you would want to upset, because anyone who offends him even slightly is already virtually history. Now, I admit that none of this sounds particularly funny, but it often is, largely because the director and co-writer Benjamin Ross, making a most impressive debut, adopts an interesting style that is certainly not comic book, but equally is less than realistic. The story is told through Young's earnest, unblinking eyes, which helps to account for the cockeyed view of a world largely populated by ugly and undeserving people. To us, most of them seem like caricatures, but from Young's perspective, maybe that's normal. So, a refreshingly odd and on the whole effective film, though I do worry about the moral aspects. The makers are at pains to point out that only Young's family are based on real people. All the others, including the victims, are fictitious, but the fact remains that in real life they were victims, and I wonder how their relatives might react to the poisoner's activities being treated as a sick joke. Now then, this year marks the centenary of the cinema. Well, it does as far as the rest of the world is concerned, but here in Britain we've decided to celebrate it next year. That'll serve the Lumiere brothers right for holding their inaugural film show in Paris and not in London. Movies started in Britain in 1896 is what we say, and never mind what the frogs were up to. This programme, however, takes a less xenophobic view, and therefore, as a modest contribution to the centenary celebrations, we'll look back from time to time at events of the past. This week, picking a year entirely at random, we've hit upon 1962, the year of Dr. No, the first Bond movie, the year David Lean made Lawrence of Arabia, and a diminutive Pole called Roman Polanski directed his first film, Knife in the Water. Mind you, other things, no doubt of lesser importance, were going on too. There was the small matter of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which for a moment looked as if it might plunge us all into World War III and totally distract attention from the fact that West Side Story won 10 Oscars. The IRA announced a ceasefire after 5 years of violence. It didn't last, though, and East Germany turned itself into a nationwide prison by putting up the Berlin Wall. Prince Charles went to Gordonston and obviously didn't like it much, otherwise why would he have sent his own son to Eton? Meanwhile, back in the real world, Sophia Loren made history by winning the Oscar for Best Actress in a subtitled foreign language film, Two Women. A Walk on the Wild Side, starring Jane Fonda, created a considerable stir because the brilliant title sequence by Saul Bass was a hell of a lot better than the rest of the film, which incidentally you can see straight after this programme. Stanley Kubrick created an even bigger fuss with Lolita, which at the time was regarded almost as kiddie porn. Anthony Burgess published A Clockwork Orange, and Tom Cruise, Demi Moore and Jodie Foster were born, each of them no doubt emerging from the womb with a cry of "Upstage everybody, I'm on." On a more sombre note, Charles Lawton died, and so did Marilyn Monroe. Accident, suicide, murder, you pays your money and you takes your choice, though my own belief is that it was an accident. So anyway, that was the year that was, and as a further reminder, here's a clip from one of the better films of 1962, To Kill a Mockingbird, which fortuitously has just been released on video. So much for 1962. We'll be looking back at another year in, I don't know, a couple of weeks' time, something like that. And now back to the new releases. Chungking Express is a slight affair by the Hong Kong director Wong Kar-wai, who achieved cult status with Days of Being Wild. This latest effort tells two loosely connected stories, both involving policemen. In the first, a young detective, Takeshi Kaneshiro, recently ditched by his girlfriend, mopes around, hangs out at a fast food joint, and eventually has a one-night stand with a mysterious woman in a blonde wig, Brigitte Lin, who, unknown to him, is a drug dealer in trouble. In the second, a uniformed policeman, Tony Leung, also lovelorn over an air hostess who's walked out on him, pops into the same fast food joint and immediately attracts the romantic attention of the kooky waitress, Fei Wang. But he's too distracted to notice that she fancies him, or to discover that she secretly visits his flat to tidy up, feed his tropical fish, and leave little gifts lying around. It's all very inconsequential, but Wong's fast, flashy camera work and cutting looks good, particularly in the first segment, and there are enough laughs and a sufficient sense of urban loneliness to keep you interested. Finally tonight we have Higher Learning, an irksome offering from John Singleton, who 3 films ago made Boys in the Hood. On the plus side, you can't accuse Singleton of lacking ambition. In this new picture, he wants to do little less than set the world to rights. He wants to tell us about racism and racial tension, sex and sexual identity, the importance of education and the rights of the group as well as the rights of the individual. Unfortunately, the arguments he puts forward in support of his ideas are little better than puerile. The setting is Columbus University, the protagonist mostly a new intake of freshmen. Here, black and white mix in many cases for the first time and don't really get on. Well, they're a funny old lot. There's Christy Swanson, who is very sweet, but does get herself date raped while drunk and then accepts consolation from the lesbian Jennifer Connelly without necessarily being gay herself. And there's a naive black athlete, Omar Epps, who is there on a sports scholarship and nurtures a variety of grievances.
There are people that would die to be where you are right now, and you tripping.
Rather importantly, too, there's a white racist, Michael Rappaport, who really can't cope with all these ethnic people around him. And that's not to mention surly older students such as Ice Cube, or the curious fact that apparently the only teacher in the whole university, and certainly the sole source of adult wisdom, is Larry Fishburne. Singleton's heart is in the right place. He wants an end to race, hatred, suspicion and jealousy, but he's taken on too much and is not a good enough writer to make it work. The film starts numerous hairs, all of which promptly vanish without trace in the tangled undergrowth of the script. Then too, none of the characters, mostly stereotypes anyway, is properly developed. The blacks are smart and cool, while the whites are either wishy-washy liberals, wimpishly nervous of their black classmates, or murderous neo-Nazis. And since the main dramatic emphasis is on the neo-Nazis, I can only feel that for all his good intentions, Singleton has tripped over his own bootlaces. The overall message to a black audience, I should imagine, is not, hey, that's right, let's all try to understand each other, but watch your back, brother, Whitey is not to be trusted. And that just about wraps things up for now. Of the new films, The Bridges of Madison County, Blue Juice and The Young Poisoner's Handbook go on national release on Friday. And on the same day, Higher Learning opens in London, Birmingham, Bristol and Manchester, while Chungking Express opens in London on Friday and over the next couple of weeks will be shown in Edinburgh, Manchester, Glasgow, Nottingham, Brighton, Cardiff, Bristol and Cambridge. In next week's programme, Tom Hanks takes command of the ill-fated Apollo 13. Emma Thompson and Jonathan Pryce star in Carrington. Ken Loach talks about his Spanish Civil War film Land and Freedom, and we meet a woman who earns her living by screaming her head off. But for now, here's Steve Martin entertaining his daughter in A Simple Twist of Fate. Until next Monday night, goodbye.